Hey folks, I want to talk to you about this application Readio. I strongly recommend Readio to help grandparents and parents read to their grandchildren remotely when they can't be in the same room. Whether you're living across the country, across the world, or you're just gone on a business trip, Readio makes it easy for you to read to those young ones when you're away. It's a super easy tool that allows for video monitoring across the top of the screen so they can see you and you can see them, as well as having the book prominently displayed, making it easy for you to read to those young ones, or better yet, having them read to you. What I want you guys to do is go to cool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link for Readio, click on that link, and sign up today for your free trial. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Welcome back. I'm excited for you guys to meet another high school buddy of mine, Thal Dixon. Now, Thal lives in Sandy, Utah. He runs a security company, and he's also an award-winning children's author. In this conversation, we're going to dive in and hear about Thal's relationship with his grandfather. It's pretty complex, and it's very, very touching. What we're going to do after that is dive into his career as a children's author. We're going to learn what inspired him to get into writing children's books, what he does with those books, and how he reaches out to the community to go into classrooms, read to kids, and how important kids' books and connecting with kids to teach them life lessons is. So you guys are sure to enjoy this conversation with Thal. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Hi, Thal. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is going to be an interesting conversation for us. We've known each other since high school, I think.
Yes.
And so, yeah, we've got some history together and interested to hear more about your grandfather.
Well, I think the grandfather that I'm going to talk about is Grandpa Penrod, and that's my grandfather on my mother's side. My grandfather on my dad's side passed away when I was very young, so don't really have a lot of memories with him. But my Grandpa Penrod, he was an interesting character, to say the least, and I spent a lot of time with him throughout my life. We moved around all the time, and my grandparents were there in American Fork, Utah, and we would go back and visit in between moves, and as often as we could, we get back there. And everywhere that we lived around the United States, and I grew up in 10 different states, my grandparents always came out to stay with us and to see us.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, yeah, they would always make it a point to come and see us everywhere we lived and spend some time with us. And my grandpa was always one of those lively ones. We had the old 8mm video. It wasn't a video camera then. It was the old movie.
Oh yeah,
movie camera.
The Super 8.
Yeah, the Super 8. Yeah, we had that. And whenever we get him out, he would always start dancing around or making faces or doing things. And so I have lots of video and stuff of my grandpa. And he's the youngest of 13. Okay. And kind of grew up through the Great Depression, and all of his brothers went off to World War II. He couldn't go because one of his legs was a little bit shorter than the other, and I guess that disqualified him.
Yeah. So he had a 4F, I think, is what I had that with my club foot. You know, they were kind of particular. If they can't march you to death without your back killing you, then they don't seem to want you.
Yeah, it was something like that. So anyway, that was a big deal. And, we used to always do like the Penrod reunion and all the brothers and sisters and stuff. Well, one of my big memories with them is all of his brothers dressed up in like drag or dresses and stuff. Uh-huh. And we did a beauty contest, and all the grandkids and stuff were rating like all the great uncles and grandpa and everybody. And then we were having a hoot. It was hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
And they came out.
That's funny. Because not many, I mean, parents or let alone grandparents are going to dive into doing something like that.
Nah, they did an evening gown and then they did a swimsuit one. It was so funny. I mean, you can imagine as grandkids, we were dying. I
Oh, I
mean,
bet.
literally falling over, laughing so hard. And they're up there posing and doing different things. It was hilarious. But he and his brothers were always a hoot. And
Yeah.
he was the youngest. He just passed away last year at 95. And I didn't go to his funeral because of COVID, and it was just one of those where you couldn't see anybody. It was, I had just seen him in the home like a month before, and grandma was already gone, so there's nobody there to kind of comfort at that point. And
Right.
so
Well, he was fortunate to have you there.
yeah, and so but grandpa was I have a lot of tender experiences with him. The way he was, I mean, he wasn't a guy that had a college education or anything, but he did very well for himself. He'd worked at Geneva Steel for years and years, and he had done a side business. He had a grader, and he
Okay.
would grade roads and stuff like that and do some construction. And he finally quit his business because he said finding work was not the problem; is collecting the money from the guys who would hire him that was the problem.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, you get a lot of those contractors that go in and out of business very quickly, I think.
And so they'd hire him, and then when you grade a road, there's nothing to repossess.
Right.
You've done the work.
The,
What are you going to do? You move the dirt,
the only thing you can do is push it all back or dump a bunch of rocks in it or
and then all
something.
you've done is gone back and done more work.
Right.
So it's a kind of a tough position to be in to collect. I don't have that issue in my business because I'm selling security cameras and they want tech support.
Yeah.
So the first thing we do is just kind of shut that down, right?
Right. Right.
But he didn't have any recourse, and so he found that was the biggest issue. But he had 7 kids, and my mom's his oldest, and so there were 35 grandkids, and
Wow.
and then I don't even know what they were up to by the time he died, as far as great grandkids and great greats. I mean, it was. But when we go to like the reunion for the Penrod reunion, our family dwarfed all the other families
Okay.
because he just had so many and stuff. Well, one of the things my grandpa said to me that there's a couple things that as I spent time with him that just jumped out at me and things I've never forgotten. And one was there was a time when I don't know what it was. I was fretting about some kind of a problem or something, and he said he goes, "There's only a few things in life that give you problems." He goes, "If you don't have food on the table and you don't have a roof over your head," he goes, "you got a problem. Everything else is a situation."
Wow. Wow. That's a great perspective, and definitely something that probably came through him during that depression timeline.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. That's exactly what, it's perspective, right? Those men that lived during those time periods, they look at it and the way they view things are very different. Sometimes we get caught up in just stupid things and we look at the end of the world, and in the big picture, they're nothing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely that perspective helps us out quite a bit. I mean, it's amazing when they do these surveys of like the happiest people or what makes up being happy. And you end up with countries like Bangladesh or some of the middle African countries or whatever, where standard of living is way lower than what we enjoy in the US. And then they're reporting being a lot happier than we are, because they've got that perspective of, I've got a roof over my head. It may not be great, but it's a roof. And then I've got some food, and everything else is situational.
Yeah. And so that was always a big thing. He also talked about like going on vacation when he would take I said, man, it must cost you a lot when you took the whole family out when they were young and stuff like that. And he said, yeah, he goes, I'd put a bunch of money in my wallet. He goes, and then we would just go. And when it was gone, we went home.
That's not too bad to help you stay out of debt. You keep racking up the credit cards.
There weren't as many credit cards back probably in the day when he was raising them, though. That wasn't as common.
No, absolutely not. But that's good advice too. Is go to the ATM or the bank, withdraw whatever the funds are, and when those funds get about a third of the way there, it's time to head back.
Yep. And so that was kind of interesting that he talked about that as well. Lot of, like I said, a lot of perspective. He was big in riding horses.
Okay.
and had his like farm that they had out by Utah Lake that he would go down to all the time and tend to some cows and raise hay and stuff like that. And had a pig down there once in a while. There'd be a pig, or there were chickens down there, all kind of things. And he'd go down there after he retired all the time. And one time I asked him, like, Grandpa, why always going to the farm? So he goes, man's got to have something to do. If not, he goes, if I didn't have someplace to go and something to do every day, I'd just die.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we all hear those stories of executives and people, they retire from whatever they've done for 25, 30 years. And within 18 months, 2 years, they've had a heart attack or just passed away because the reason for existence has essentially kind of gone away. They haven't found something else to take that time.
Yeah, I don't think it's in my personality to retire. I don't see that happening. And the way I am with a lot of my businesses and the things I get involved in, I don't see myself ever really retiring.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, let's jump back a little bit and tell us about the first memories that you have of your grandfather.
Well, when I was really little, I have memories of going over to their house for Christmas and things like that. When I was 4, we lived in American Fork. My dad was in Korea for a year, and so we lived in American Fork. And sometimes I'd spend time over my grandparents because my mom had reached her wit's end with my brother and myself and my older sister, and then she gave birth to my younger sister halfway through that year. So my mom had her hands full, and we did all kinds of crazy stuff to the rental house that we lived in. And sometimes grandma would come over and just be like, Thal, guy, we're going over to our house for the day, and like take us away so that my mom could have some sanity. But I was probably, one of my memories with grandpa when I was about 6 or 7, he let me have a sip of his beer.
Oh, wow.
Because I was checking it out, and he was like, oh, you want a taste? And so I had a taste, and I just remember going over to the sink and just spitting and spitting. I couldn't get the nasty taste out of my mouth. And it was never something I ever desired to be a beer drinker. So I guess it worked.
Yeah, that's similar to that old story that we sometimes hear of kids getting caught smoking, and here's a carton. I want you to sit here and smoke the whole carton, and
yep.
Doing that sort of thing.
Get them sick, and they never want to pick up a cigarette again, right?
Right. Or sneak granddad's beer.
Yep, exactly. So it was just one of those things, and yeah, I remember him being that way. Grandpa was always, he's a cowboy, wore a cowboy hat most of his life, and always had his hat on and his boots everywhere he went. But I spent a lot of times, I got to spend a summer with my grandparents. When I was about 13, I went and spent a summer. I'd stay with them. When I went out to college, actually, up in Idaho, I flew into Utah, and my grandparents drove me up.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and it was me and Jennifer Sides. They drove up to college.
Right. I remember we all had a semester up there, I think. Correct. About the same time.
In fact, I'm going to tell you a story that was pretty embarrassing. It's more my grandma.
Okay.
But grandpa was laughing right there with him. So my grandpa had a surgery, prostate cancer or whatever, had surgery. And afterwards, so my grandma was telling us about this we stopped at a restaurant, and I'm sitting on one side of the table in between my grandparents, and Jennifer sitting on the other side of the table in between my grandpa's brother and his wife. And we're talking, and they start telling this story about how after the surgery, my aunts came in and said, well, Grandma, I guess you're done. Grandpa can't perform anymore. I guess you're finished, right? And Grandma was like, if I get real desperate, it's nothing to popsicle sticks and some string won't fix.
Oh, jeez.
And Jennifer and I about went under the table. Oh. We went bright red. And of course, my grandpa, my grandma, and my Uncle Ned, and they were just laughing. They thought it was so funny. Of course, because they embarrassed the young people, right?
Right. Yeah, you gross them out.
They were just hooting about it, thought that was hilarious, right?
Oh my gosh.
But we went bright red, and it was kind of funny. But they dropped me off when I went to college, and then a year later I came back, and my grandparents, they took me to the missionary training center in Provo before I left on my mission.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, how did that relationship change around a little bit during your teenage years? I know with your dad being in the Army, um, you were saying that you were, back and forth and visiting in 10 different states, and they came out. How did the relationship start to change over those times from being a little kid to all of a sudden you're in high school, going to college, and then going off to the missionary training center?
Basically, that's the thing with my grandparents. They were very consistent. I mean, I would love to sit and talk with them, and just I'd sit in the front room with my grandparents and visit for hours. And just they would tell us stories about family, about different relatives. I remember when I was spending time as I was a little bit older, probably about college age and stuff. My grandpa he would read the obituary all the time. He's been reading the obituaries. I'm like, why are you always reading the obituary? He goes, to see who I know. And I was like, really, Grandpa? And he's like, hey, I grew up in these parts. I went to school with it. They would sit there and discuss, hey, didn't we go to school with him, or did we know him? And they would do that. And I'm thinking, that's a very foreign concept than to our world.
Right.
People are more mobile. And so reading the local obituary, you're probably going to not know anybody.
No, it doesn't.
But because they grew up there in the Provo area and in Orem, Utah and stuff, a lot of them knew each other. In fact, my parents from the Dixon side, the Dixons and the Penrods went to church together. They lived down the street from each other. And my mom's younger brother and my dad's younger brother were best friends.
Oh, wow.
And so they all knew, so when my grandma died, I had a lot of relatives, even from the Dixon side. I had aunts and uncles from there that were over there paying respect because they had grown up with Fern. They'd grown up, she was that, not only was she the mother-in-law to their brother, but they had grown up in her house practically.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of that and the closeness. And we would run into people sometimes that from other areas, they knew that were kind of from that area of Utah and stuff, where it was very much more close knit than it is in our generation.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, part of that's the mobility, and then part of it's also the size of communities that you and I grew up in.
Correct. And technology and all those things were different. I mean, you go back to when they were growing. I mean, even when the telephone came in, it was only like 4 digits, right?
Right. It was the party line.
The party line. And then you went to the 4 digits. Then it was and it just changed. And so a lot of the communities were, here's a story you're going to like about my grandpa. With his first 3, his oldest, my mother, and then my aunt Linda and Aunt Lorraine, they were all within 3.5, 4 years, all 3 girls, right? And they would get toilet papered a lot because of them. And Grandpa would make them go out with sticks and roll it all up. He goes, yeah, you just tell those boys to keep bringing it. With 7 kids in the house, he goes, we'll take everything they give us. And he'd make them roll it up and bring it in the house, and they would use it.
Oh my goodness.
So you see, he was a character.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And he never even get mad about it. He was like, oh, you thank those boys. Yep. Anytime they want to come over and give us some more toilet paper, we'll be happy.
Oh man. Oh, that's funny. So how did you feel about that, that relationship when you were going over and talking with them? Because it was probably a little bit of a two-way street in terms of you would hear a lot of the family stories and a lot of the experiences that they had in between visits. But then with them asking and talking with you about what was going on with your life and how these moves were affecting you. And
yeah, they would ask questions. They were always somebody I could talk to. It was like having somebody, sometimes as a kid, you can't talk to your parents as easy. And my grandparents were really good that way. I actually talked more with my grandma than my grandpa as much when I was younger. What was really interesting is once I went through a divorce later on when I was an adult, I was always kind of one of my grandma's favorites as a grandkid. And I was very close to her. But if you got on grandma's bad side for whatever reason, then it was tough to get off it for a while. And once I went through my divorce and stuff, I was kind of like, I don't know, I kind of wasn't in grandma's graces as well. And then grandpa, that's when it's like then grandpa stepped in and actually got even closer to me. Because my grandpa really had unconditional love. You know, a lot of my aunts and uncles, there's a lot of, we've had all kinds of trouble and different things. People, some, have been in and out of jail. There's been other issues have gone on, and, substance abuse, other things. And they're just welcoming, and they're just forgiving and really, really loving in that regard.
Do you think that helped to keep you in contact with the family and not feel as so isolated? Like you still had a family unit that was there.
They were close. I mean, here's the thing. It was very obvious to me that the Penrod family was way closer. They were a lot closer than the Dixon family. I mean, not that my Dixon family wasn't close, but not compared to the Penrods. And I think that what I saw is that there was just such a closeness to the parents and stuff that everyone had. And I think, and it all started with grandma and grandpa. My grandparents were high school sweethearts, got married at like 18.
Wow.
And so by the time I got home from my mission, they were having their 50th wedding anniversary.
Okay.
And they were just always connected. Grandma and grandpa were just always connected. And they, I'd laugh because I'd stay with them. And if you listen to them, it seemed like they were bickering and fighting and stuff, but they weren't. They would just kind of like nag back and forth at each other sometimes.
Right.
But you could tell that the real love was really there. I mean, it was like they would give each other a hard time, sometimes, but they were just so connected. Grandma and grandpa were just one of those couples that was always like that.
Kind of like best friends, but best friends not, I don't know. I want to say the best friends the way that guys can be best friends, where they can kind of egg each other on, tease each other, and
correct,
and some of that.
Correct. And grandma sometimes, like I said, grandma sometimes would start going off about like one of the kids or something. Because grandma would just let loose and be like, "Oh, they're being stupid." She started like going off about somebody, and grandpa would be like, Fern. He tried to like calm her down, like don't be bad mouthing one of your kids or something like that. He would always, that's just grandpa's way.
Right. Well, it sounds like they both had an attitude, like you had said, of just unconditional love and acceptance. I mean, grandma sounds like she did have some, I won't say conditions, but it sounded like from the way you described it, like you could end up in the doghouse for a period of time, but then you're back in. You're still family, let's say.
No, yeah, that's totally how it was. I mean, like I know a lot of cousins and of mine and different people that grandma and grandpa helped. And I know they helped some of my aunts and uncles, the ones that needed more help growing up in different situations. And I know that the farmhouse, like my uncle lived at the farmhouse forever. And when some of my uncles went through their divorces, I know my grandpa was involved in some of that, try to help them, financially and things in their divorces and setting things up for them. And there was just a lot of that going on all the time. We weren't part of it most of the time because we were the ones moving around.
Right.
And we weren't like really there. But I do know that when my parents bought a house in Minnesota when I was young, that grandma and grandpa loaned them a bunch of money so they could put the down payment and stuff. And because grandma told me that she felt like it was a mistake. My mom did daycare in our home, and she did it because she was trying to pay her parents back faster.
Okay.
And grandma was like, we didn't need the money fast, but your mom, she said that when my mom brought those daycare kids in our home, that it was not good for our family dynamic. And that's when a lot of the problems started happening with, like my older sister and some of the issues with just things in our home that, my grandparents were like, it's because your mom was so worried about paying the money back when she's like, we weren't in a hurry to get paid back. But, that's the torn thing because, they raised my mom. My mom, very independent, doesn't want to take a handout, doesn't want, and so there's that. My mom talked, my grandparents talked about when my mom first got married before my dad went to Vietnam, things like that. And when he was away, how they'd kick her out of the house, basically, tell her to go home to her apartment.
Oh,
but like, you don't live here anymore. You need to go to your place.
Right.
You're married, go home to your house.
Yeah.
And which I think is a very important lesson, especially when you got 6 more behind you. You need to set the precedent. It's like, I can't have you all here forever.
Right. We've given your room up to one of your siblings. You can't have it back yet.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So there, it's just some of the things I look at are generational, and maybe they're not even unique just to my grandparents. They're just, I think that's one of the things that you get from a relationship with grandparents is you get that relationship of, you skip the generation, right?
Right.
So you get to see that perspective, and a lot of things come in full circle by the time you get to the next generation.
Oh, sure. Well, and as grandparents, we've got a little bit more wisdom because we've gone through a cycle of raising the kids.
Correct.
And so there's, speaking for myself, there's a little bit of like, oh, yeah, that didn't work out so well. With the grandkids, I'm going to do something different.
Correct. No, exactly. You're able to look at it and go, yeah, I think that's or you find out what things are really important.
Right.
And what things you don't have to worry about, right?
Yeah. Like you said, food, roof, everything else situational. Don't sweat it.
Yep. And some of the things that, you can't overreact to certain things. You just have to be like, no, I think that's it.
Sure. Now, how did the relationship change as you came back off the mission, grandparents' 50th? You're now a young adult. You're starting to go through and finish up university studies and getting on with life. And how did the relationship change or develop a little bit more?
I don't really feel like it changed that much. I mean, there wasn't a real big difference for me in my relationship with my grandparents. I mean, there was a mutual respect there, but I've always just thought the world of them. And they're, like I said, my grandpa didn't go to college and things like that, but grandpa was a master of so many things. And what my grandpa was good at were a lot of the things I'm not. I mean, I'm not a handyman. I'm not the guy that's going to, grandpa go out and shoe the horse. He could go out, they could, in his young days, break in a horse, do all these different things, right? And all the kind of farming and different things. And the stuff that grandpa knew was all new to me.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying it didn't really change, because when I'd go see my grandparents, I was always in their world.
Well, and I was also talking a little bit as well as just how did the connection develop? Did you, were you connecting at even a little bit of a deeper level because now you're a young man, you're starting your life, there's more, you're starting to get more, let's say, adult connections, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think was really different with my grandparents is they were basically, they gave us room to grow a little bit more than parents. Sometimes parents, it's like you feel more of a sudden change because, I know like in my home, you have that parent-child relationship. And then I left and I went off to college, and I came home after a semester at college, and my dad treated me totally different. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And it was so sudden that it was so obvious to me. But my grandparents it happened so gradually that I didn't really see a big change, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It just kind of happened gradually. Whereas with my parents, it was more sudden. I went off to college and then came back, and it was very different.
Yeah, I think that as you described it, your grandparents were very consistent over time, and so allowed for that growth and allowed for you just to develop as just Thal's getting older.
And it wasn't that foreign, because the world that I went into, for example, I went off to college, I went on my mission, came back, so forth, and then but then I got my commission into the Army through ROTC. And so even then, it wasn't that different because they'd already gone through my dad with West Point and stuff and marrying their daughter and stuff like that. So I was just like the next generation of that same thing. So even from their perspective, it's not like it was a real foreign world. They had come to see us like in Hawaii when we lived on the military base at Schofield. They'd come to see us at so many different places that world wasn't foreign to them anymore.
Right. They just knew, okay, Thal's Thal's got his swearing in. He's going off to training.
Yep.
Here's
it wasn't a foreign. It wasn't like I was like breaking a new mold like my dad had done. So it wasn't that. That's why I think with my grandparents, it was, and even like with church and religion and so forth, my dad was always a stalwart. And so he was kind of and I was just kind of in my dad's footsteps in there as well. So it wasn't really foreign. I mean, one thing was when it came to church and religion, I mean, my grandpa really hadn't gone to church my whole life growing up. And then when I left to go on my mission, he went back to church, and, he was sealed to my grandma in the temple. And they basically right before their 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And so, so 49 and a half years of marriage is what it took for grandpa to get to the temple. And then afterwards, his confidence and stuff when it came to like, things with church and stuff was never really that high. And so whenever there'd be a family reunion or anything, even if there was, I've kind of become the family chaplain. So okay. If we have a reunion or something, if there's a prayer on the food, anything like that, they're always hunting me down. And somebody needed a blessing or something, they're hunting me down. And so, and that's kind of the thing. And it was just always like, even when we've had funerals and stuff like that, I'm the go-to on all those things.
Wow. That's a lot of responsibility for a large family, being as you said, the family chaplain.
Yeah. And I've noticed that a lot while I've been here. In fact, just in this last year, I've had a few funerals and different things, and I've dedicated a lot of graves. And, but when my grandpa passed away, one of the things I did is I was supposed to go dedicate his grave. And I actually told them to let one of my other cousins do it. Because I felt like I had such a tight relationship with grandpa and everything. And I said, give that experience to one of my other cousins, that, nobody was going to really be there at the ceremony. They were going to make the people stay in their cars and stuff like that. I was like, give it to somebody where it's going to mean more.
Yeah. No, wow. That's really selfless, so they can have that experience.
Correct. And I just looked at it as, it's one of those things where that might be a connection for one of my cousins, that there was a couple that could have done it. And I just recommended they have a different, it was interesting because his mother called me. So my aunt called me and was like, are you sure? I was like, absolutely, I'm sure.
Wow.
Because I understand what that does. I know how those connections work. And I had so many with my grandpa because, when he, like, for example, right after he was sealed in the temple while I was on my mission, then my mother was sealed to them the summer of the 50th wedding anniversary. And I was able to go and participate in that. And I was the only grandkid in the temple with them. And I was able to be a witness there. And my grandpa was a witness at my weddings. And so it was the same thing. And I've had those experiences with him where he would come out for those types of events. And, it's always been a close relationship with him. A lot of times with us being in the other area of the country, like when I went out to school, because I came out west, my grandparents for about 6 years, that was kind of my home base.
Oh, yeah.
I even used their address for my mail for the military, but it was kind of like my home base because I'd come out and go to school up in Idaho, but they were there in down in Utah, and I would go back and forth in between semesters, and I always flew out of Salt Lake. So I'd go down and spend a few weeks on each end with them all the time, and I'd go down for Thanksgiving, and I'd go down. So I was around my grandparents a lot during my young adult years.
Yeah, that's special because I remember my grandfather was over in Eastern Oregon, just outside of Boise. So when I was going to school out there in Idaho, a lot of Thanksgivings, breaks, whenever I could hitch a ride out there, I probably saw him more in those few years where I was in Idaho than I had before. Most of my visits with my grandfather were every 3-5 years or so, but that time in Idaho, it was probably a couple of times a semester, catching a break and then going out and seeing him. And that was really an interesting thing, being in late teens, early 20s, to have those conversations and have a similar experience.
Yeah, and that's huge. And like, I'd call my grandma and say, hey, I'm coming down. And she's like, okay, we'll have your room ready. Now, if there was another cousin that was staying down in one of the rooms downstairs, right? She was like, well, I've got so-and-so here, so I'll have to put you in the room upstairs or whatever. Your room's taken. But she would refer to it as my room.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which was kind of crazy. And then, of course, I'd show up and she'd have like a gallon of chocolate milk in the fridge.
Yeah, all the treats and things for you.
She knew what things I liked, and she'd have them.
Yeah.
And so that was all. It was just stuff like that. And another thing that was funny is my grandpa didn't like pizza.
Huh.
But grandma did.
Any particular?
So sometimes grandma and I would go for pizza together.
Any particular reason why he didn't like pizza? Just
I don't know. He just didn't like pizza. So grandma and I would go for pizza.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and it's funny because my wife doesn't really do pizza either, and so I do the same thing with my son. I'll take my youngest and go for pizza.
Oh, that's cool.
The two of us will order pizza together.
Gave you and Grandma some time away to talk and visit without Grandpa.
That's not really hard because Grandpa would always take off and go to the farm.
Oh, okay.
And so Grandpa, like sometime during the day, I got to go down to the farm. Even Grandma would give him crap about it. Like, what do you got to do down there? And he's like, and he'd get frustrated when she'd call him out on it, but He'd always drive down to the farm. And it was only about a 10, 12-minute drive away. And he'd go down there and putt around at the farm.
Yeah, you got to go down and spray the weeds and check on the fence a little bit and see what's going on with the gate. And and my Uncle Barry lived at the farm. And he would just groan every time Grandpa came down because Grandpa would go in and go, hey, have you checked this? Have you done this? And and I can only think sometimes that, how annoying that had to be for Barry all the time. Yeah.
Because every time his dad came down to the property.
Well, at that point, I'm sure Barry's also thinking maybe I should just break some stuff so he has something to fix.
Well, it got a point when he was older, he couldn't do much, so he'd always want Barry to fix this or Barry to fix that, and then he's out there putting around. He's
supervising.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was stuff like that, but it was one of those things where they had, I think, 20 acres down there.
Okay.
And he had divided it at one point and gave 10 of the acres to Barry with the old farmhouse, and then the other to my Uncle Kelly. And just like the last couple of years, they both sold out. Because everything here in Utah has just exploded in real estate. Yeah,
you got all the Californians moving in.
Oh, the prices of housing out here is just insane. If I told you what it costs for housing out here, you would die.
Yeah.
But they sold. I think Barry moved a couple hours south, and they both moved a couple hours south. But Barry ended up buying. He bought this huge piece of property with his own mountain.
Oh wow.
My Uncle Barry. Definitely a cowboy. He looks like Willie Nelson. Just that way. Yeah. Wrong century.
Now, one thing I wanted to do too, what I've got you on is, and some people may not know, but you are a award-winning author of, 11 children's books?
Yeah, I have 3 that'll be coming back from the printer here this fall. That'll take me up to 11, yes.
Wow. So how did a guy that went through the Army, started his own security company, start getting into writing children's books?
Well, it started with poetry, actually. It started in 8th grade. Okay. It was either 7th or 8th grade. I had a poet come and visit our class. It was in the 8th grade, actually. Came and visited my class in Hawaii. And I remember because I was living on Schofield Barracks at the time, which is a military base, right? And this guy came in and he was probably part Hawaiian, part Asian, but he had long hair that went down to the back of his kneecaps. Wow. Just a guy. So yeah, it kind of stuck out in my mind, right? And he came in, but he did like a class on poetry with us. And then one of the popular poets of the day was Shel Silverstein. that we grew up with, right?
Right.
The light in the attic and where the sidewalk ends and the giving tree and so forth, right? And I started writing, and I found that I could write just like them.
Wow.
It was just something I could do. The rhyme came very easy to me, rhyme and meter. It was always something. It was just like a gift that I had. And so I started writing poetry in high school. And I had stuff that I wrote in high school, and I was getting a lot of feedback that, I could be published on that. And so I continued writing. And when I first went off to college, I started sending my poetry out to get published. And I started putting all the rejection letters on my wall. And until I filled half of my wall by my bed. And then I got my first check and a couple copies from a magazine, from Lady Circle magazine. And then after I did that, I took all my rejection letters down. And over the next couple of years, I got published like 20 something times.
Okay.
For poetry. But there's no money in poetry. Nobody buys it.
Right.
And, and even, the check that I got was like $35. It was ridiculous, right? And you think about just your effort of sending it out every place. And it just wasn't worth it. So once the shine kind of wore off that penny, I continued to write. But then as my kids started to grow, it went from writing poetry to writing full poetic stories. So my stories are in rhyme and meter as well. Most of the children's stories I've written, it's poetry as well. And I'd come up with ideas that would come from things that usually there's a message or a lesson I wanted to teach my kids.
Okay.
Something inspired it. And then I'd sit down and the story would just come.
Well, and that's where I think you've got a theme or general character, the Grumpies, right?
Yeah. The company is called Grumpy Publications because the first book was Invasion of the Grumpies.
Okay.
And it wasn't the first story I wrote. I actually wrote quite a few stories before it, but it's the first one I actually published into a book. But I wrote it in 2009 when we first moved to Utah. My daughter, who's now 16, she was 4, and I came downstairs in the kitchen, and she was being kind of grumpy that morning. And my wife gave me this look. So I went over and I tousled her hair, and I was like, "What? We got some grumpies in your hair?" And that was the idea. And like a week later, I sat down and wrote the story. And it's all about how these grumpies come into the town and make everybody grumpy. And they're, invading all the houses and the families are being grumpy and upset. And then there's this one mom who, when she sees her daughter being grumpy, she gives her a hug and a kiss. And that makes the grumpies all run away.
Oh, nice.
And they start retreating. And, they're like worried that this mom's going to tell all the other moms the secret to making the grumpies go away. And so, when I usually present in schools and I share that book, I talk to the kids about how do we make the grumpies go away. And we talk about if you've ever been in the car and maybe one of your brothers and sisters, cause I'm like, it's never you, it's gotta be one of your brothers and sisters, right?
Right. No, we're perfect. I don't know what's wrong with the rest of the world.
Correct. So, and then I'm like, have you ever had them turn around and be like, stop being grumpy and get kind of like, say it sternly, right? And I go, does that ever work? And the kids are like, no. And I'm like, right, what happens? It makes them more grumpy. And so we talk about that and what they need to do. And I ask them if their teacher's ever grumpy. And, they always laugh and say yes. And we talk about if you tell them I love you and stuff like that. And so it's a very good message for the kids. And then that's kind of what inspired all of them is I just go through and each story has its own message. Yeah. Like that. Okay. And that's what I started doing. And I self-published. I created my own publishing company because I already had the experience with publishing traditionally with poetry. And the problem I found is like, let's say an editor starts to like you, right? They pretty much publish everything you send them after that. But at first, and then so what I learned was a lot of times it didn't have to do with the quality. It had to do with, did you write the poem on the right subject? Is it what they're looking for subject wise or things? And there's a lot of that. Like even now, if you were trying to get a children's book published commercially right now, they'd probably want to know how diverse it is. Does it involve, certain things that are hot political topics of the day that, there's always that agenda, right?
Oh yeah.
And I don't want to be involved in that.
Well, also it's to your point, your publishing companies are following what's hot or what's the
Correct.
trend or trying to jump in front of it. I mean, I had a friend of ours that wrote, young adult novels. And she jumped in and got in on the whole pirate craze like 8-10 years ago. And, got 2 young adult books published. But if you'd taken the same stories, but they were robots or sci-fi or something like that, to your point, it wasn't what was hot at the time.
Correct. And the other thing is, I write, to be a good writer and to write a good story, you write what's in your heart. And I think that if you're trying to write what will sell, that you don't write the same quality. Right. And then I don't write. My dream. I actually had a dream to become a writer when I was young, but I learned real quick that there's no money in it. And so, for the most part, so what I did is, I have my businesses that make me my money, and my books are a passion project, a very expensive passion project. I must say, it's a very expensive hobby. I might as well be into horses or something.
Right.
But I love it. I get up in front of. I'm probably in front of a couple thousand kids a year.
Well, and sorry, let's talk about that a little bit, because I thought that was really interesting to hear that your sponsor, you have sponsors that allow you to go out to grade school kids, go through the books, talk about the books, have presentations, and then provide books to all the kids so that they have their own book. And I thought that was interesting. So how does that work with getting the sponsors and your schedule about going out? Because to me, that's also a little bit of the big payoff, right? You were talking about you don't make a lot of money, but I bet you after, one of those elementary school visits, all of a sudden you got 60 new fans and 60 new little buddies that are excited to see you.
No, the biggest thing is I get a lot of thank you cards from first graders. And those are gold to me. I get all of these handwritten notes and everything. I even had one little girl one time who gave me her phone number and said, call me. It was hilarious. I was laughing. But it's really, and I walk into a school even years later, and kids will recognize me as I walk in. They're like, are you coming to our class today? And I'm like, no, you're in 3rd grade now. I'm going to the 1st grade. Oh, man. Yeah. And they're like, you're my favorite author and stuff. And so there's a lot of reward in that for me. And, I don't write my books to make money. The only reason I even try to, obviously it costs me a lot of money to put a book out. And so I'm trying to generate enough income so I can keep putting more books out faster and faster. Okay. But it's not about profit margins or anything for me. If I just broke even on everything, and I would definitely make some money on them if I didn't print so fast, but I just can't stop printing them. And so I'm printing new books faster than I can sell off the ones I have.
You got cases of these things in the garage?
I have my own building.
Okay.
I own a commercial building down in Salt Lake that I run my security business out of everything. And I have an entire wall in the warehouse where I have pallets. And I have book boxes, and I have right now in stock, probably sitting in there, 20,000 books.
Wow.
And I have 21,000 coming back from the printer this fall.
Okay. So you don't just have boxes of books, you have pallets of books.
I usually print 6,000 to 7,000 copies and they're hardback, 8x10.
Okay.
So like the large Dr. Seuss style.
Right.
And, and that they're all the same size. And so if somebody had all of them, they would fit nice and neat on the shelf. Right.
Yeah.
And then my goal is I don't want to completely sell out of a title. So what I do is I get the new one in, I'll do my school visits that year, and I'll probably push a couple thousand out the door. And then I have the other ones for stock. And by then I'm moving on to the next book. But then when people discover me like locally and stuff, and they come in and they want to get a set, then, I have all the books to sell them. And another thing I do is I give books to clients of mine because I own my own security business. Yeah. And so a lot of times we'll do camera installation for somebody or whatever. And as a thank you gift, I'll give them a set of books.
Oh, nice.
Which is really, personable. And there was an old Jewish guy that helped me when I was first starting in business. And he used to give a Toys R Us gift card to people if they had kids. And I asked him, why a Toys R Us card? And he was like, why not something else? He goes, I found that if you give somebody something, most of us kind of forget about in a few days. No big deal. Okay. Because we don't really need anything. But you make somebody a hero with their kids and they remember you for life.
Oh, that's true.
So then I took it to another level. And the way I came up with the idea for the book sponsorship is, being a business owner, I kept getting hit up to sponsor this team or that team or all this stuff. People would come in asking me for money or donations or sponsorship. And that's when I was like, I can sponsor myself to go into schools. And then once I could sponsor it. And then I started finding other business owners that would sponsor me. And as I started winning awards, it was easier and easier to get sponsors. And what I do is I put their sticker on the back of the book. So it's advertising for them. They can write it off as advertising. And one of my pitches, I talked to them, I said, you've probably tried lots of things for advertising. And a lot of times, maybe you do a flyer, you do this, you do that, and it ends up in the trash, right? Well, if this doesn't work for you, at the very least, you gave books to kids. And most business owners are like, yeah, that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I get some that just have big hearts. And I have like one guy, he sponsored me. He has a roofing company. He sponsored me now for, I want to say 6 years in a row now. And he goes with me.
Oh, cool.
He loves going and talking to the kids and stuff. And he immigrated from South Africa. So he's got the accent and everything. And he likes to talk to the kids himself. He has like 8 of his own. And
wow.
Been a bishop and everything. And he's just loves to go in and do that and give back. And so, and then take pictures and put them on Facebook or whatever. But it's a magical thing. You go in there, you start. And this is what I learned is children's books, your clientele doesn't have any money.
Yeah.
And so, the people that buy the books the most are grandparents. Young grandparents is the demographic that buys children's books. That's what I've learned.
That's true. I won't say guilty, but I'm in that demo. I mean, my wife, I don't know how many of the Dr. Seuss books are hanging around waiting for the kids to get old enough to read them.
To give them to them? Yeah. Well, think about it. You probably don't know what the latest and greatest video game is for them.
No. You
don't care. You don't know what their music is. You don't know like what movies are into, anything like that. But a classic children's book, you can't go wrong. So right. it becomes a default. Plus, it's something you can sit down and do with them when they're little. So it's an interactive thing that you can do with your grandkids. So a lot of young grandparents buy children's books as gifts for their kids.
Yeah.
For their grandkids.
No, that makes sense.
And I've seen this pattern. I because at first when I was trying to sell my own books, young parents don't have money to go buy new books. They're buying diapers.
Right. Formula
and other things. They're not buying books. Grandparents are. And so you just understand that. And what I find here in Utah, it's funny is somebody will talk with me and they find out about my books and they get excited and they're like, yeah, I'd like 3 sets. One for this family, one for that family, one. And so, I mean, just like that, they're dropping a couple $100 with me to just buy up, and then of course, a lot of times I'll sign them and, make them out to their grandkids.
Yeah. Oh, very cool.
And so that's very rewarding. But, this last year with COVID was kind of different because getting into the schools was a little tricky. I did my first Zoom meeting for one, but I still went to schools. It was fun to watch first graders wearing their masks. Kinda. They were kind of wearing their mask.
Right. They were giving it an effort.
Yep. And it was kind of funny to just watch that. But then, I did one school over Zoom. And so I feel like I could do a school visit over Zoom with no problem. So that would open it up for me to visit with people all over the country. Right. Right. And then, but there's still that energy of being in front of them. I mean, that's what I love. That's my payoff, and not all. And, those are 2 different skill sets, obviously. Writing the stories is one thing, but I love to get up and kind of perform and to get in front of the kids and to have a room full of kids and teachers and so forth, and then have them almost hanging on every word. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of reward in that. And then, of course, at the end, when I'm handing out the books and we're posing for a picture or two, and they're all excited and stuff. And we do it as kind of like what I did this last year is I did a reading challenge. And I said I would bring the books back at the end of the year. And I told them that each class had to read 500 books by the end of the year as a class.
Okay.
And that's not a lot when you're talking Dr. Seuss books and stuff. And some of the kids think that's a huge number. Then I'd explain to them, there's like 20 something in the class. So it really doesn't work out to that many books. Right.
Right.
And I had a kid in one of my schools here. When I went back to deliver the books, the teacher came up and told me that one of the boys in her class was worried that the other kids wouldn't pull their weight.
Yeah.
And so he read 500 books by himself.
Wow.
And handed her a reading log with everything. She comes in with this report. And I was like, are you serious? So I said, check with his mom and stuff. I'd like to bring him down. So long story short, I brought him down to my shop in Salt Lake and talked to him. I showed him some of the upcoming projects I'm working on and the prototypes and everything. And then I gave him a completed set of the books, and then also a t-shirt of his favorite book. And he was pretty happy.
Oh, wow. Well, you probably just became that hippie poet for him.
Exactly. And then, I bring that up and I tell that story because kids ask me that a lot. And I usually tell that story. And my goal is that because of what I'm doing, maybe next generation, there's 10 to 15 people that become writers because I visited.
Yeah. No, that,
we'll see what kind of effect it has, right?
Absolutely. So, as we're starting to kind of wind this down, I'm going to have you circle back a little bit and think, what are 3 things that you feel like your grandfather did that would be examples to other grandfathers in their relationships with grandkids? And if you can't come up with 3, that's fine.
One of the things that Grandpa did that, is just, he allowed us to grow. Like he would spend time with us, but Grandpa kind of let us learn and figure things out. He'd give us stuff. I always had new experiences. So like if we go to the farm or things, I do remember this is back in the days when we would sit in the back of the pickup as you drive down to the farm.
Yeah.
And he's always like, sit down back there, because we'd be up walking around as we're driving down the road. And he's, people would have a heart attack these days, right?
Yeah.
And then, so he would let us, I was always getting new experiences with him. He was teaching me, you're learning how to put in a fence post. You're learning how to wrap barbed wire around it. You're learning how to feed the cows, to haul hay, drive the tractor. There's so many different things, ride a horse. These are all things that, that he would give me experiences. A lot of time with stuff like that. He'd bring me out and sometimes there were things he was doing that I just wasn't interested, but he'd find things that, that he could teach me. That was one of the biggest things. It's just, he was constantly teaching me stuff.
No, that's awesome. That's great advice. Now, what's the best way for folks to get in touch with you about the books and everything that you're doing along those lines?
Well, I have converted all my books to video. So they're all on YouTube. And you can, if you just go to thaldixon.com, which is just my name.com, I say thaldixon.com, it'll forward you right to my YouTube channel. And all the videos are on there. And then my company, Grumpy Publications, it is grumpypublications.com is the website. So any contact information is available.
Okay, perfect. And
or you can just Google my name. I'm about the most accessible person. I mean, if you Google my name, I think the first 7 pages of information on Google is all me.
At least the first couple, because I was looking that up.
It's an advantage of having a different name, right?
Yeah, for sure. And folks, I'm going to be putting the links to Thal's website and Grumpy Publications in the show notes so that it'll be there. So you guys just go to coolgrandpa.us, and in the show notes for this episode, I'm going to have those links in case you didn't have a chance to write them down while we were talking.
Awesome.
And Thal, thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I've enjoyed learning about your grandfather, and I've enjoyed learning about your writing and your creativity side.
Thanks.
What did I tell you guys? Thal is a great person. I really enjoyed listening to his stories about his grandfather. It's also interesting that Thal kind of became the default chaplain for his family. I thought that was really interesting and very touching. I also enjoyed learning so much about his career as a children's author. Now, to learn more about Thal or connect with him, be sure to go to the show notes at cool-grandpa.us. Check out those show notes, look for the links to Thal's different businesses, and be sure to connect with him. Tell him hi, and let him know that you enjoyed this conversation on the Cool Grandpa podcast. Until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.